So there was a time where thousands of Dutch residents spent time digging through their garbages after they had learned they might have thrown away a diamond. See, there was a local jeweler who spent who sent 4,000 clients a mailing marking the 10th anniversary of his store. 200 of these envelopes contained a small diamond, while the others contained a cheap substitute for costume jewelry. Many people who received the letter ignored it, thinking it was just junk mail and threw it away without even looking inside. When only a few people responded to the mailing, the jeweler called several clients and learned most had discarded the mailing without looking at the contents. Though sending precious stones to clients, it is not unusual in the Netherlands, the jeweler told a local newspaper. I was very naive. People nowadays do not trust mailing like these anymore. Perhaps the mailing seemed too good to be true to those who read the letter, so they threw the contents away after glancing at the letter, but others didn't even bother to open the package. It's a shame. But a rather greater tragedy is the number of people who never bother to listen to God's offer of forgiveness. You're among the lucky ones who heard the message, who's going to hear a message today. The only question remaining is what you will do with the offer that God has made to you. Unlike the one the jeweler made, God's grace is real every time. He doesn't offer costume jewelry. Yet every day, people turn down this offer and throw away their opportunity at eternity. Today, we're going to be looking at this next message in our Joy series, which this is the only message that's not really talking about a question when it's relating to joy. See, we've looked at, is my joy real? Where does my joy come from? Today, we're looking at joy in happiness. We think of joy and happiness going hand in hand, don't we? It's kind of like a matching set. And so today we're going to be looking at that together, joy and happiness. So we're going to be looking at the book of Matthew once again. Last week we looked at Matthew chapter 19. This week we're going to go back a little bit. We're looking at Matthew chapter 13. And so Matthew, the book of Matthew, the main theme in this book is Christ as King, and how it was originally written to the Greek-speaking Jews of this particular time period. So I'm just going to back it up a little bit in the book of Matthew chapter 13, just to kind of give like what's going on here. So at the beginning of this chapter, we see that that Jesus is talking to a big crowd of people, and it became really difficult for him to talk to people, to tell the message, to tell parables. As we see, there's a lot of parables in this particular chapter. And so what Jesus does is that he actually gets into a boat, and then they row out a little bit so he can speak to people. Now, that might be a little bit weird, isn't it? Why does Jesus get into a boat to speak? Well, number one, because there was a large crowd of people, and it would be really tough to speak when you're all crunched up and smushed together. But also, it was going to be tough for the receiver to hear the message if Jesus was right in their ears, yelling and screaming, so then people in the back could hear. So he's like, okay, we got to step back a little bit. And so Jesus gets into the boat, and they row out a little bit. And also, they didn't have microphones during this time. We have microphones today. I got a microphone right here, and we got speakers set up. We got a sound system. But strange enough, they didn't have a sound system invented. Microphones were not created during this time. So what did they do? They had to be creative on how do they make voices bigger. And the thing is, waves on the water, they carry the sound even farther. They help push the sound even farther out. So in a way, that's kind of like an early addition to a sound system. And so Jesus talked about various parables during this chapter. He talks about several parables. This is actually divided up into two sections here. The first section we see where Jesus is talking the parables to the crowd. We see he's talking about the sower, the weeds, the mustard seed, and the yeast. And then later on in this chapter, he stops speaking to the crowd, and then he actually just starts talking to the disciples. He's just talking to them, to the 12 disciples. And so in the ones he's talking to the disciples, we see the hidden treasure, the pearl of great value, the net, the horse's owner. And so today we're going to be looking at two of those parables that Jesus talked to just the disciples. We're looking at those first two, the hidden treasure and the pearl of great value. And so the first parable we're looking at, the parable or the hidden treasure, the parable of the hidden treasure, which that's verse 44. And our first point, which is treasure in a field. First point, treasure in a field. And you know what? We did look at it earlier and read it. I'm just going to read it one more time for us. Again, Matthew chapter 13, verse 44, which says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, he went and sold all he had and bought the field. Now, something unique about this man is that when he had discovered this treasure, he didn't lift the treasure out of the ground. I know, it's like, is that a big deal? It actually is, because during this time, it was actually law that if any treasure was lifted out of the ground, if anything of value was lifted from the ground, then it would belong to the current land owner. Well, this man, he didn't own the land. He was just working the land. He just discovered this hidden treasure. And so what he did, so he just saw it and he's like, oh, there's treasure. And so he just buries it back up. And he says, you know what? I'm going to go buy this land. But in order to buy it, I got to sell a few things. So he went and he sold all that he had. He came back and went to the landowner and said, I'd like to buy your land. And he gave it up. He bought the land. And then he was able to go and get that treasure and then lift it from the ground because it's now his. He is now the landowner. And so when he bought this land, he knew he was actually going to get a lot more in return than what he was buying for. You see, like today, what is everyone saying that you should invest in? Real estate. You got to buy real estate because then the price goes up. The land becomes better and better. My wife and I, we're currently looking at a house right now, and we're seeing that those prices just seem to keep going up and up and up and up. But in this particular case, the man wasn't necessarily the value of the land itself wasn't going up. It was because of that treasure that was hidden away. He knew he was getting more in return because of this great treasure that he had found. It was much greater than what he was giving up. He was willing to give up what was lost, or willing to give up what he had to get this treasure. Sorry about that. So, and what is Jesus talking about in this parable? It's a description of discipleship. See, Jesus is talking about discipleship, following him, being a dedicated follower of Jesus Christ. See, Jesus is talking about what you get in return is worth a lot more than what you're giving up. See, is what a lot of people, they might just see the land. People just see, oh yeah, that's just a big piece of land. So what? But the man in the parable knew that this was something unique. He wanted this land. He knew there was something valuable and he wanted it. And so he sold all he had to buy that land. He was willing to give up so much, selling all of his stuff, giving up everything so he can have this land that had this valuable treasure. You know, in a way, it kind of reminds me about early on in the book of Matthew, and actually looking at Matthew chapter 4. We see that Jesus calls to his disciples. Actually, they weren't technically disciples at that time. He was talking to Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and looked at them and said, "Come and follow me. I'll make you fishers of men." And they said, "Okay." And they dropped all their stuff. They got out of their boats. After, like, this was after one of Jesus's first miracles, where Jesus said, "Cast your nets on the other side of the boat," and they had that big catch of fish. See, these four men, they're fishermen. This is what they do for a living. They just dropped all they had. They dropped their jobs, dropped everything that they were doing, and started following Jesus. They could have made a big profit off these fish, but they said, "Nope, we're going to follow Jesus instead." So that was looking at the hidden treasure, the treasure in the field. Now, our second point today is treasure with a pearl. Treasure with a pearl. That's our second point today. This is in verses 45 and 46. And I'm going to read this parable for you again as well, which says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he had found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it." So we see this merchant looking for pearls and actively searching for the best pearls. So this was most likely his job, to search for pearls, to maybe make jewelry or something or other, to then eventually resell again. So he's got to find good products. And he finds one. That's unique. He finds one pearl. He has to find pearls, like plural pearls. In fact, we even see it in verse 45. A merchant looking for fine pearls, that's plural. He needs to search for multiple pearls. But then he finds one. In verse 46, when he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought that one pearl. Yeah, that's a great business strategy, isn't it? It's like, your job is to go find multiple pearls. I mean, you probably have seen like necklaces with only one pearl, right? Right. Maybe there's like extra strands on there, but but there's like multiple necklaces. It's like, but traditionally when you see a pearl necklace, there's like what, like dozens, like probably at least a dozen pearls on there. And so it's just like, in order to make one necklace, you need several pearls. And he just gets one pearl and sold everything else he had. So he probably sold all the other pearls that he had with him to just buy one. Yeah, again, great business strategies. But the thing is that this man knew that this pearl was something different than all the others. He wanted this one pearl, willing to give everything else he had to buy this one pearl. Now, over the years, there's been a little bit of confusion about this one particular parable. You see, people have said that, well, this pearl represents Jesus, who finds the sinner, dies for him, giving up everything for him, for this one sinner. Some people say that the merchant is the person and is actively searching for truth, searching for what is real, what is not, and finds this one pearl, the pearl then representing Jesus, and then giving up everything to follow Jesus. Some people have even said that the pearl is representing the church, and there's a couple other theories out there, and researching and trying to understand what's going on here, it's like, is it possible that there's a little bit of truth in all of them, in all of these different theories? No, I'm not saying like, oh, it's okay, believe what you want to believe. You could also say oh, it's a man searching for a wife and he finds the one wife and it's this pearl. And it's like, no, that's not what's going on here. That's not what Jesus is teaching here. So I'm not saying like, oh, everything is okay and believe what you want to believe. You got to actually have some like quality thinking in here, trying to understand what truly Jesus is saying here. And so, is it maybe that the pearl is is representing Jesus? It's representing the sinner. It's representing like there's a lot of things that it could represent, but it's also like with the sound doctrine and sound mind and everything. But the biggest thing that we have to focus, especially with these two parables, it's a different way of thinking. It's kingdom thinking, kingdom of heaven thinking, and it's different. It's unique. See, these two guys here, we see the man and the merchant selling everything that they had for one thing. That's a different way of thinking. And also, this part is not in your notes, but we see that there, with both of these parables, there's a lot in common. Now, a lot of like some of the things that are in common are some of the problems that are raised up. For example, the first one is I need to sell my stuff in order to follow Jesus. And as we talked about last week, it's not about selling everything we have and giving it to the poor in order to follow Christ. How we talked about last week with the rich young ruler, where Jesus said, sell everything you have and come and follow me. And the man said, oh, I like my stuff. I don't want to give it up. And he walks away sad. And because of his wealth, he liked his material things. It's not about giving up everything. It's not about selling our stuff. We don't have to get rid of everything in order to have joy, but it's about the sacrifice, the joyfulness in giving something up. And it's not like, oh, I'm just going to give up everything with a sad face. I gotta sell my house. I gotta sell my car. Just give up everything and just having a sad face. No, it's the willingness, the joyfulness, because it's the knowing there is something more important. The kingdom of heaven. Also, something else we see, one of the problems is that sometimes people would say like, oh, I've got to find Christ. It's Christ's job to come find us. In fact, it was the job of Jesus when he came on this earth. In Luke chapter 19, we see that Jesus had a mission to come to seek and find the lost. That was his job. He came to find us. He has found us, but it's up to us to then accept him. So that's just a couple of the problems that we see in both of these parables. Now, a couple of the good things that we see is that both of these men were willing to give up what they love to get the treasure, to get the pearl. And as we talked about, that the entrance to heaven is not about selling all that we have. It's not about selling our stuff, our possessions. And having possessions is not a sin. It's okay to own stuff. It's okay to have stuff. But both parables that we see is that the man and the merchant were willing to give up something for the treasure. They were willing to give up what they owned, what they had for this treasure. And both men knew that the treasure was worth the price. They understood that, hey, I would have to give up something, but the price was fair. But knowing that I'm going to benefit more in the end, that I was going to receive a lot more than what I put in. But then we also know that both men had a desire to have the treasure. Once they knew about the treasure, the man knowing about the treasure hidden in the field, and then the merchant knowing about the pearl. They wanted it. They had to have it. And this is like the desire to have this treasure. It's not the same thing that we see at the store. Ooh, I like that. I want that. Or I don't know about you men, but sometimes you drive past a car dealership and then you see, ooh, the Corvette. You see like the big pickup truck. It's like, ooh, I'd like to have that. It's not that type of desire. This is something that is far greater than a Corvette or that thing you find in the store that's like, ooh, I like that. No, it's something much more. It's the kingdom of heaven, a desire for Jesus, wanting Jesus and nothing else. In a way, it's kind of like when we see here with the man and the merchant willing to give up everything, it's like they were willing to give it up because of the treasure that they were going to get, the treasure of Jesus. And for our takeaways today, our application, you see three things. We cannot pay our way to heaven. That's our first thing. We cannot pay our way to heaven. Friends, I can't stress this point enough. There's no work that we can do. There's no amount of money that we can pay. That does not matter. Unfortunately, there are people today that preach this. In fact, I would not be surprised if there's somebody today at the pulpit right now, obviously not here, but somebody saying this, that you must pay your way to heaven. Give the church more money so you can spend more time in heaven. Friends, that is completely false. And honestly, if you know someone who goes to a church that preaches that, invite them here, because I will never preach that. And I'm not praising myself. I'm not saying follow me, follow Jesus, obviously, but that it's a false teaching. Don't let them hear those false teachers, those wolves in sheep's clothing. Teach them about the one and only way to heaven through our faith in Jesus. Second thing that we see is that the true treasure is in Jesus. See, we might have items of value. We might own things that might be worth thousands of dollars, like your homes. That's worth quite a bit of money. Maybe you own a nice car. But the true treasure is in Jesus. And also, there's going to be a time where our stuff will no longer be our stuff. Back in 2021, my mom and my aunt were sitting down trying to figure out how to sell their parents' possessions. You see, they had both passed away. My grandfather, he went to heaven and back in 2019, and my grandmother joined him back in 2020. 60 years of marriage together. And well, with both of them now gone, they were trying to figure out, okay, what do we keep? What do we sell? Because, well, neither of us had space to have everything. And so there was some stuff that had to go. We were able to keep several items. My grandfather was a jeweler and he owned a jewelry store. So we still have some of his leftover stash back when he owned the store. We had to sell quite a few of the clocks that he owned. He also was a watch repairer. So it's like, well, we could have maybe a few clocks, but with the 1,000 that he had all over the house, well, we couldn't keep them all. But one of the items that we were trying to figure out what to do with, that my mom and my aunt were trying to figure out, was my grandmother's piano. She played the piano for the church she and my grandfather attended, and even was the director for the worship team for some time. She played that piano. She practiced on it probably night and day, filled the house with praise and worship music, and even taught lessons on there, even teaching various praise and worship songs. But with them gone, what do we do now? Trying to sell it to the highest bidder? Do we just toss it? What do we do? We found a new home now. And that piano now sits in a church, continuing on with the playing of worship music on Sundays. But it's no longer my grandmother's piano. It's now the church's piano. But then also, this kind of goes into my last application point today, is that we do not truly own our possessions. I know that might be a little bit difficult to kind of comprehend a little bit and think about a little bit. It's taken me a little bit too as well. It might sound a little crazy, is that we don't own our possessions. It's like, well, Tim, it's like I have the paperwork right here. I own my house. It's like the car that I have in the parking lot. Yeah, I own that. According to the government, I own it. It's like I've got the paperwork, I've paid it off. It's mine. But is it truly yours? See, in the book of Hebrews, chapter 2, is that we see that everything belongs to God. Interesting, huh? So if everything belongs to God, then we're just borrowing it for a little bit. There's also that very famous saying, well, we can't take it with us. See, all these items that we supposedly own here on earth, these are just earthly possessions. And also, one day my car is going to break down. It's going to rust. It'll no longer work. It's not going to last forever. And that's okay. But what does last forever is Jesus. The greatest joy in our lives is Jesus. He is the true treasure. Nothing compares to Jesus. Let us pray.